Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Also consider becoming a member, a Patreon, or donate small amounts. Without further ado, let me welcome our guest, Scott Ritter. Scott is an American, former United States Marine Corps intelligence officer, former United Nations Special Commission's weapons inspector, author, and commentator. Scott, welcome back to India and Global Left.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
About 9 days ago, you gave us an exclusive interview where you said, and you were one of the first, and the video was by about 400,000 people. You said that what we are seeing in the White House in terms of American foreign policy is a most transformational period in the history of American foreign policy. In the light of that analysis of yours, how do you describe what happened between President Zelensky and President Trump and his vice president on Friday at the Oval Office?
How do I describe it? Inevitable. There was no other possible outcome of this meeting. Anybody with two working brain cells knew this. Ukraine and the United States are on two fundamentally opposed trajectories. Ukraine is on a path towards committing some sort of national suicide on behalf of a Europe that is rediscovering its warmongering past. In the United States is a superpower fully aware of the role that we have played in promoting conflict in the world these past decades, and finally having a president willing to identify the root causes of this urge for conflict-based hegemony, and is actively seeking to deconstruct it. So when you have a president on that trajectory that's the American president, meeting a Ukrainian president on his trajectory, and you bring them together, this is the inevitable outcome.
One of the things you told us is that Zelensky's government is already collapsing. And watching that debate, that fiasco, I was wondering what made Zelensky so committed to the kind of suicide that he did at the Oval Office by arguing his case that is unarguable. I wonder if it is the pressure of his home constituency. Is it that he had to play to the gallery back home that emboldened him to do what he did? What's your thought on that?
Well, first of all, I'm hesitant to use the term like emboldened him to do what he did. There's some sort of nobility to that. Is a drug addict emboldened to seek out their next fix? I don't think anybody would use the term emboldened, because that implies nobility, that implies strength, that implies something that is worthy of admiration. Zelensky is a drug addict in the final throes of his addiction. And this isn't just his obvious addiction to cocaine, which has manifested itself so flagrantly these past weeks. It's his addiction to power, addiction to corruption. Zelensky is a walking manifestation of everything that is bad with the human condition. There is no redeeming quality to this man. So I hesitate to throw terminology at him that somehow implies that he represents anything good. But Zelensky is more than just the failure of an individual. He's the failure of a nation, the nation of Ukraine, which is an artificial nation, a fake nation that is built upon the premise of white supremacy. Now, I know you're from India. I don't want to insult anybody, but I certainly hope that you and everybody in your geographical region, you are familiar with white racism. You have suffered under white racism. You know what it's like to live governed by white supremacists, people who look down on you and use language that demeans you. Ukraine is the living manifestation of modern white supremacy. The foundational ideology of Ukraine, Western Ukrainian nationalism, has seen itself manifested in what we call banderism. But all banderism is Ukrainian white supremacy. They literally claim to be the Übermensch. They are the ultimate. They look down on anybody who is not from their specific racial identity as subhuman. Just like the British looked at you as being subhuman. All right, so let's stop giving nobility to these people. They are evil at the core. The nation is an evil construct, an artificial construct put together by an accident of history and then had life breathed into it like Frankenstein's monster by Dr. Frankenstein, which was an amalgam of the United States and Europe. So that's the other thing we have to recognize. The flaw isn't just Zelensky. The flaw is the national construct. And then we have to talk about Dr. Frankenstein, the flaw that is Europe. Europe is a fundamentally diseased continent. Its history proves this over and over and over again. From the earliest manifestations of European identity through Charles Martel, to the Crusades. Again, I just want to remind the people that aren't white like me who have European roots, you know darn well what white Europeans are capable of doing. God wills it. You know what that means, don't you? That means I take the Crusader's sword and I plunge it through your Saracen heart. God wills it. And God has been willing Europe to slaughter the world as its minions in this racist imperialist conquest and then turn on itself. Napoleonic Wars. What do you think that was? World War I, World War II, the Balkan conflict, the war in Ukraine. It's part of the same diseased culture of Europe that cannot tolerate peace. Europe is a continent incapable of tolerating peace. Europe must have war. And because America was largely derived from European roots, we inherited that mindset. And we have tragically, over the course of many decades, been a nation at war with the world because the only way to promote American hegemony was to do it through the tool of conflict. We now have a president who has said, I recognize the evil, and it is us. He literally said this. He said the greatest enemy of the United States is the United States because how we interface with the rest of the world. And he has come to power by appealing to the American people to break free of the chains of this conflict-driven military-industrial complex. And everybody can say that's theory, and I challenge you, and I said it to you last time, it's not theory, it's reality playing out right in front of your eyes. You just choose not to see it, not to believe it. But he is tearing apart that infrastructure that promotes conflict. What do you think the dismantling of USAID was? What do you think the dismantling of the National Endowment of Democracy was? Why do you think he has ordered the Pentagon to begin immediate reduction in budgets without any major foreign policy objectives? Because the trajectory is to demilitarize how America interfaces with the rest of the world. And Zelensky, Ukraine, and Europe can't handle it. See, Zelensky is a product of Europe. The Churchillian construct that's been put in is a British propaganda exercise run by MI6, by the British Secret Intelligence Service. It's helped by the CIA, it's helped by mainstream media, but the major script writers all have British accents. And he is promoting this. But what was Winston Churchill? Again, I don't need to tell you who Winston Churchill was. See, in the West, we glorify him as the man who's going to fight people on the beach. In India, you know him as the mass murderer that he is, the man who killed millions of Indians during World War II, and the world didn't say a peep because you're brown, you're not white, you don't count. That's the mindset, and that's the European mindset, that's the Ukrainian mindset. We now have a president in the United States who says that's not a good mindset. That's a bad mindset, that we should be promoting peace, not war. But Europe doesn't know peace. Europe only knows war. And this is the fundamental reason why that meeting was never going to work. Because Zelensky is a flawed human being representing a fundamentally flawed national construct that is a derivative of one of the most corrupt cultures in the history of mankind. When we think of that which has been wrought on humanity over the centuries, the Europeans are the core evil. The Europeans, from Europe comes the drive to slaughter in the millions. No other movement, even the Mongols coming across don't kill as efficiently as the Europeans do. So we have an American president that has said no to this. Now, he's not perfect. I mean, we can sit here and go through the difficulties of his Middle East policy, and the accusations that he is a supporter of Zionism. Um, I have attempted to put together a narrative that shows he is trying to break free of that. Um, but it's a difficult narrative to sell because of the the more the more I try to say he's also trying to bring peace to the Middle East, the more I turn on the TV and see Israel committing acts of violence, promoted by the United States. And so this isn't a perfect president. America is not a perfect nation, and our policies are not perfect. But what I ask people to do when we speak of Ukraine is to become singularly focused on Ukraine for the moment, because Ukraine is the one conflict that could kill every person in India. You do know that if there is a third world war and it goes nuclear, you all die. You will not live. So this war means more to you than any other conflict out there right now. And so we have a president who says he wants to bring an end to this war. I'd like to believe the world should be trying to give him a chance.
It's important to reiterate that President Donald Trump, again and again during the debate, that fiasco, told President Zelensky that you are playing with World War III, and he repeated it twice. Um, Talking about uh, the American as an architect of this war, I want you to comment on the Democrats' response to what happened and the kind of hysterical streak that most Democrats went into. One wonders if Zelensky was fighting his battle in which the Americans supported him, or was it even Americans' battle in which Zelensky was just a puppet, and whether the Democrats' response to President Trump's push for the ceasefire exposed that primary American aggressive policy in Eurasia?
Well, first of all, great question. It's a very perceptive question. Because we have a tendency, all of us, all observers have a tendency to become singularly focused on the drama playing out in front of us. And what we saw playing out live on TV was the most dramatic thing we've seen in the world of diplomacy ever. You have never witnessed a moment like that. Um, and so we tend to focus on, the positioning of the hands, Zelensky's rolling of the eyes and all this. But the fact is, Ukraine is a symptom. It's not the disease. It's a symptom of the larger problem of how America interfaces with the world. And when you take a look at, again, this is just a straight up statement of fact. As DOGE, and your audience is familiar with DOGE, I hope, the Department of Government Efficiency, which isn't a department, it's just this made up construct, but it had to be made up just so people understand. You cannot deconstruct an evil empire by relying on the minions of the empire to deconstruct it. There's a reason why Donald Trump fired all of the inspectors generals, because the inspectors generals come from the ranks of the already corrupted, people who have already sold out to the system, and they rise up. They're supposed to police something, but they're not. They're the gatekeepers to ensure that no fundamental change takes place. It's not about policing, it's about preventing change from happening. And so they were eliminated. DOGE came in. And what is DOGE finding? DOGE is finding out that, first of all, the entire construct of American foreign aid um, is corrupt because it's not about helping anybody. It's about empowering America by using foreign aid as a cover to achieve regime change or regime manipulation. I don't want to get too political here, but India was a victim of this as well. Um, and then we can get into who was driving this. Let's take Georgia before I talk about India real quick. The Republic of Georgia was the recipient of hundreds of millions of dollars in U.S. money, foreign aid money. I did last year. I did a deep dig into it. I broke apart the USAID budget, and what I found, what we were doing in Georgia, was promoting alternative cultural concepts in the name of diversity. Georgia is a fundamentally conservative nation. I'm not saying that that's good. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm saying it's Georgia. That is the reality. But instead of respecting that reality, what we sought to do was alter that reality by coming in. And the very first thing we do is we empower diversity. Now, that may work here in America. Some would say it hasn't worked, hence what's happening today. But that's an American concept, an American construct. That's how America deals with America problems. Now we're taking this American solution to a problem and applying it to Georgia, empowering elements of their society that their society would normally not empower. Flagrant homosexuality, transgendered identity, ultra feminism. I mean, if Georgia is one of those nations that you used to be able to go to and you understood who was a man and who was a woman. And it wasn't shameful to be either. It was who you were. And yet we have decided to make it shameful to be a woman in Georgia. And therefore, we've allowed men to become women to redefine what it means to be a woman, while real women aren't allowed to be real women. And any man who seeks out a real woman is a problem because that's toxic masculinity. No, men must love men and have homosexual relations. And now it's all great. That's the approach that was taken to empower this from the grassroots up. So first thing you do is you shatter the cultural identity of the targeted nation. And then you come in and you empower them politically. The next layer is the creation of grassroots political movements around this new diversified identity, and they're empowered politically. And then you promote political change from the grassroots up. Anytime you hear the United States speak of grassroots political movements, you know what I'm talking about. It's about a revolution from below. Now, you still have the problem with the Georgian government at the top of the pyramid. So how do you deal with that problem? Well, the third layer they put in there is about information. We have to have a good press, a solid press, a sound press. So you promote a free press, but all you're doing is layer in a layer of propaganda that then the final step, or I guess the penultimate step, is fighting disinformation. So you build your propaganda machine, and now anybody who criticizes what you do is immediately attacked as disinformation, misinformation, Russian, this, da 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 da. So you silence the opposition, and then you have your final election where you tell the government they have no choice to go because the people have decided that they are in charge. That's the model of USAID. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars to do that. Fortunately, Georgia Dream was smart enough to identify this and come up with the alternatives. I don't want to get into India too much, except to say that I think one of the most recent headlines I read was that a major movement, for transgendered surgeries has to shut down because USAID funding is no longer available. Why in God's name is USAID funding transgendered surgeries in India? That's a question I have for the Indian people. I'm not saying you can't do transgender. That's your business. But why aren't you paying for it? Why does America have to come in and impose this on you? And I just told you why. Because we're trying to do to you what we tried to do to Georgia, what we try to do to everywhere. Now, think about what I said. Does any of those funded programs sound like conservative Republican values to you? And the answer, of course, is hell no. And what Doge is finding out is that throughout the entire construct of foreign policy, we're looking at 95, 96, 98% of the money is going to democratic, politically driven programs, that foreign aid is an empowerment vehicle, not just for regime change, but the money flows back into the Democratic Party to pay off constituents, to how many with what they're finding is, these they say we're gonna promote, and there was this one ridiculous program where they were training Afghan women to be appreciative of something that was ridiculous in modern Afghanistan today. And the wife of this person, was in charge of this non-governmental organization, receiving millions of dollars to do nothing. But he was a donor, and that's how it worked. She created an NGO, received money from USAID to do a program that's non-implementable. They haven't done work in Afghanistan for years because we were kicked out, and yet every year she receives this money. No one asks any questions. And she has about a 60 to 70% overhead, meaning if she receives $1 million, 600,000, 700,000 goes into her pockets to do nothing. This is how America has been operating, the corruption of this. So what Trump has done is to declare war on this, to dismantle this. Are you beginning to understand why the loudest voices screaming in opposition to what Donald Trump is doing are Democratic voices? Because Donald Trump is destroying their gravy train, their thread of corruption, that which empowered them, disguised as official spending by the U.S. government, therefore never to be questioned, but never to be audited, never to be stopped, just a permanent flow of money. Ask yourself why we can never cut a budget. Because once we begin the gravy train, you can't end the gravy train. There are checks going out to programs that have been around for 30 years and nobody asks what they're doing, why they're doing it. The checks just keep flowing and the checks keep getting cashed, which means somebody on the receiving end is putting that money in their pocket. For what? To change the world for the better? No, it's corruption. America is being exposed as the single most corrupt nation on the planet. I think we even beat the Ukrainians in scope and scale of our corruption. And the leaders of this corruption is the Democratic Party. Because while the Republicans aren't perfect, and while the Republicans don't have the best policies, I personally like a lot of the policies that the Democrats put out. I believe in clean air. I believe in education. I want all this stuff to happen. But what happens is they use my belief, my desire for clean air, to create an environmental protection agency that becomes a cash cow of corruption. It doesn't accomplish anything. It becomes a permanent bureaucratic edifice that takes billions of dollars and disseminates it to people who don't produce anything of value, just enrichment. And so Trump is saying it all has to go. We're going to tear it all down. And when it comes to Ukraine, look at what he's tearing down. NATO. Mark my words. We're not going to be in NATO much longer. We may not be in NATO by the end of summer. And when that goes, if you want to think about, programs that do nothing except serve as employment vehicles of people who do nothing for political purposes, the NATO bureaucracy is this: think tank after think tank after think tank, working group, advisory committee. Hundreds of thousands of people are employed who do nothing, zero. And it's all paid for by the American taxpayer. And the Democrats benefit from it because they stack all these things. All these people that normally couldn't get a job anywhere get these highly funded sinecures at think tanks to sit down and just spew propaganda. And they get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to do this by the American taxpayer. This is what's being destroyed. And this is why the Democrats are screaming the loudest. This isn't about preserving, American honor and American dignity. This isn't about, protecting the world or feeding the homeless or it's about keeping the money flowing to their wives' secret bank account or their mistress's secret bank account or their homosexual lover's secret bank account. Whatever. The Democratic Party is fundamentally flawed. And if Trump takes it to the next level, which he could, because he has a attorney general and a director of the FBI that are not of the system, they should all be arrested. I mean, we should be talking about the fundamental at the end of World War II, we had the Nuremberg trials. Nazi Germany was, of course, a fundamentally corrupted place, but they made a decision that they were going to try 22 of the top Nazis. Not everybody, 22. And maybe we need to pick 22 of the top Democrats. Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, Chuck Schumer, the most corrupt, fundamentally corrupt people in the world. Arrest them, put them on trial. We don't have the death penalty, but put them in jail for the rest of their pathetically short lives. The Democratic Party is a criminal enterprise. It makes La Cosa Nostra look like Boy Scouts in comparison. And that's why they're screaming the loudest.
I know you need to go, but if I can ask one final question,
Sure.
Scott.
Yeah.
I think you put the nail on the head when you said that Europe is the root of this expansionary ideology, thinking, mindset, whether it's the military expansion, whether it's all these cultural wars, or whether we are talking about color revolutions, toppling governments after governments. Europe is definitely at the root of it. And I want to come back to the Dr. Frankenstein, because if you look at the events that has followed, it started by uh, the head of the states of two of the most important countries in the European, or let's not call it European, in Europe, coming to the White House and advocating for Zelensky, followed by Zelensky coming, and then Zelensky going to the UK, where the Prime Minister of the UK said that there is full support for Ukraine in this war across the United Kingdom, which is, of course, not true, and pledging a military support of $2.26 billion. Can you end this conversation by talking about the future of US Europe relationship if the US has to disentangle itself from Europe, given a lot of people in Europe are contrary to this, they're saying that we are being betrayed by the United States because the post-war reconstruction was us being allies of the United States. Your thoughts?
Again, a great question. I'm not going to give you an easy answer because there isn't an easy answer. Um, I cannot tell you that Europe is all bad and America is all good. That's just an outright lie. In fact, in the post-war reconstruction of Europe, we used Europe as a tool to promote American global hegemony. We used the reconstruction of Europe, and then we helped manufacture a artificial existential crisis with um, the Soviet Union to justify the restoration of militarism in Europe through the vehicle of NATO. But we made sure that we dominated NATO, that we were in charge, that we directed NATO. We also did the same thing in promoting the creation of the European Union. That was the notion of a unified Europe, the economic aspects of which would be responsive to the United States, the same as NATO expansion responsive to or NATO responsive to the United States. And this worked. I mean, it's evil genius. It worked. Um, but then the Soviet Union collapsed and we didn't have a plan B. And what happened in the collapse of the Soviet Union is that America sought to retain control, hegemonic control economically. Look what we do with the G7. If you can't be a thinking person and don't understand the goal of the G7 is for the United States to dominate post-World War global economy, both in the Pacific and in Europe, especially in Europe. And then through NATO, we sought to expand our reach. The G20 becomes about global economic domination, and NATO starts, itching to get into a fight, in places that have nothing to do with North Atlantic, in Libya. I remember I attended a NATO conference in the United Arab Emirates, where they were talking about setting up a NATO presence in the Middle East. NATO was going to make the Middle East its little baby. North Africa was going to become part of that too. And then, the Pacific now. So NATO became this global tool of American hegemony. And what happened here is, and I've said this to the Europeans all along, to every single one of them. We are not your friends. And I'll say this to the Indian people too. We're not your friends. America doesn't exist to be your friends. In the mindset of old America, you exist to do what we tell you to do. You're our tool. We use you as a tool. We'll play you off against other tools. Uh, but what's the purpose of a tool? To do its job until it breaks. And then when it breaks, we just throw you away and we get another tool. Okay, we don't care about you at all. There is zero compassion in the American enterprise towards India, towards Europe, towards any nation out there. We only care about America. And even Donald Trump, in his, the new approach he takes, just look at the name of the political movement that he leads. Make America great again. There's no room in that for India, for Europe, for anybody else, unless you are helping make America great again. This isn't about making India great. This isn't about making Europe great. You exist only to facilitate America being made great again. That's a reality. But the difference this time is that Trump is trying to break free of a fundamentally flawed paradigm, and that is the military-industrial complex paradigm that Dwight D. Eisenhower warned us about, the post-World War II situation where in order to keep our economy going so we don't drift back into the Great Depression, again, study historical timelines and understand that in the mid-1930s, America was a nation in economic and social collapse. It took the World War to bring us out of it because we were able to create giant industries, mobilize the industrial base, and make the arsenal of democracy. But then the war ended. And what do you do with the arsenal of democracy? If you deconstruct it too fast, we go back into the same fundamental flawed economic principles that brought the Depression. So we have to artificially boost the American economy by keeping a war footing in a non-war environment. And that's what the Cold War was all about, creating the perception of constant conflict and sometimes the reality of conflict to generate war-based manufacturing.
Some people have called it military Keynesianism.
Yeah, I would too, except I'm going to be honest, I'm more of a student of, George Patton than I am of Keynes. So I hesitate to go down that path because I would expose myself as being a fundamentally fraudulent person when it comes to foundational economic theory. I'm a guy that has a hard time balancing my own budget. So but no, I'm being a little facetious. Of course, I have studied this, but I do avoid using terms like that because I'm not an economist. I'm superficially conversant in economic theory, but I'm not a specialist at all. And so I try to avoid coming off as a specialist. But I agree with you. Um, the but the point is that this model that we have, it's one of these. And now you got me thinking economically. You should have done that. It's like a Ponzi scheme. You know what I'm saying? A Ponzi scheme can never work because you're basically robbing everybody to enrich the person at the top under the flawed theory that they're going to make it to the top. When you have, and maybe this is what military Keynesianism is all about, a giant Ponzi scheme. When you have an American industrial base that in order to thrive requires conflict. The problem is each growth cycle requires more conflict and more conflict and more conflict until we get to the top where the ultimate conflict is nuclear conflict and we all die. It's a suicide pact. And I think Donald Trump, because he's not on the set, one of the problems we have is we keep electing presidents that come from the establishment. And so they come from a system that is addicted to the economic power that is derived by this sick relationship between American militarism and American economic strength. And so they're blinded to the fact that they're literally driving off a cliff. We finally got a guy who didn't come from those roots, and he got in there and he went, "Hey, we're getting ready to drive off a cliff. Why don't we stop the car?" Now, everybody can say, well, but America's been heading to that cliff forever now. You say, yeah, but I'm the driver now. I want to stop the car. And what I don't understand is why the world doesn't go, please stop the car. Instead, they're going, no, no, no. When Obama has a seat, he accelerated. I'm going to blame you for everything Obama did. Okay, but I want to stop the car. Let Trump stop the car. And that's what he's trying to do is stop this Ponzi scheme, this existential Ponzi scheme from turning into a nuclear conflict. But to do that, you have to deconstruct how America interfaces with the world. Um, and as you do that, there are problems, especially in Europe. See, in Asia, we are benefited by the fact that India and China took a non-aligned movement, early on. I wrote a paper about, gosh, I'm going to fumble it now. 1956, the Bandung conference in
Bandung conference in Indonesia.
thank you. So I wasn't off too much, but I write them and then I get involved in other things. But the whole concept of that was creating an alternative, social economic construct. It didn't play out, but I think you could say that BRICS is sort of a modern day manifestation of that Bandung philosophy. And so what we see, what BRICS is Eurasia, the Pacific, the global South, saying we want to not become trapped into this paradigm of militarized, conflict that feeds the American hegemon. And so I think you guys are lucky. You have your own problems. India, Pakistan, that's a problem. India, China, that's a problem. And India, America is going to become a problem. There's no doubt about that. But at least for the most part, nations that are outside of the transatlantic bubble are seeking to resolve conflicts diplomatically and economically. Um, Europe can't function that way. Europe has become the monster of Dr. Frankenstein. America, we created this monster. We thought we could control it. We thought we could keep them caged up and go, okay, bomb Libya. We'll go bomb Libya for you. All right, let's go take out Afghanistan. I want you to occupy Afghanistan instead of going transatlantic. Why Afghanistan? Yes, we're going to go in and do nation building in a part of the world we know nothing about and doomed, therefore, to fail. We want you to send troops to Iraq to do what? To help us kill Iraqis. Okay, we're going to do that too. And then Ukraine comes up, this whole thing. Europe, though, becomes empowered by this. And they're basically this over testosterone monster now that what thinks it can do it by itself. See, the ultimate sin of Dr. Frankenstein's monster, it was in the monster becomes self-aware. I am capable of doing this myself. And Europe's not. And they're about ready to find the harshest of harsh lessons. Because when America unplugs, and we are going to unplug, and we're going to do it in a way Europe can't even imagine, because they've bought in the notion that we're their friends. No, Europe, you've never been our friend. Never been our friend. You are a tool. What about the special relationship between Great Britain and the United States? You do understand that Roosevelt was, first of all, he sucked the life out of your economy, took all of your gold, took all your bases, and then said, when the war's over, I'm dismantling your empire. Is that how a friend works? No, you were a tool, and you get used as a tool. But you were Frankenstein's monster. You worked for your master. But now they all think that they can declare independence and move on. Europe is incapable of doing anything. And I'm just saying that straight up without America. Europe cannot function without America. And when we unplug, Europe will die. This will be one of the cultural catastrophes of modern history, is the death of Europe. Now, it'll still exist. And if you can afford it, you can take a plane to Paris and look at the Eiffel Tower. I'm sure the French will have enough money to make it sparkle at night. And you can go to London and look at Big Ben, and you can go to Rome and go to the Colosseum. You can go to Berlin and look at the Reichstag. I mean, Europe's got a whole bunch of really cool, but Europe will become nothing more than a glorified tourist destination. Europe as a global power will cease to exist. They've already moved down the path of deindustrialization. They're never going to get that up. And if they want to go to war with America, an economic war, we can collapse the German economy, which is the heartbeat of Europe, overnight. Overnight. Why don't they realize that? Europe can't collapse us. We can collapse Europe. And now, here's the thing Europe has to understand. We're about ready to become friends with Russia, who's friends with China, who are trying to become friends with India. Russia is friends with India. I think you're going to see that the next century is going to be defined by the new big four. And that is the United States, Russia, China, and India sitting down and telling Europe, you're not invited to this. You're go make your bed and breakfast, because that's what Europe's going to become, a glorified bed and breakfast where people can go and visit and, listen to quaint accents. But that's it. Europe's not a power. It's nothing. It'll be done. But the big four are going to be governing, and that's the transition that's taking place here. We're going to kill Frankenstein, and we're going to go off and deal with real people. And this is the genius of Trump. Because when we sit down with people, it's not the relation between master and servant, equals. When we sit down with Modi, it's not the relationship between craftsman and tool, equals. When we sit down with China, we still have to fix this Chinese relationship, but we will. It'll be as equals. That's sort of cool. It's not perfect. I can't guarantee that everything's going to come up smelling like roses. But you know what's the best thing about it? India will never have to worry about a British overlord coming in and starving millions of your people to death because your lives don't matter, that they need your food to feed the white man. China won't have to worry about opium wars. Russia won't have to worry about the 1990s reemerging. And the United States is changing its outlook, where we enter the lead foot that we take isn't the military foot, it's the economic foot. And as soon as you start talking about the economy, you know what you do? You humanize this. War is about killing. If I lead with the military foot, that means I'm going to kill you. And they created people like me who live to kill. That's the problem with militaries, is their singular focus is to take human life on a massive scale. We're the problem. I'm the problem, because my mind always leads with the military solution. We hopefully can train the next generation of people who lead economically, which means when I sit down with you, I'm asking you how to put food into the bellies of my family, and you're asking me how to put food into the bellies of your family. And now we agree on something. We're not trying to kill each other. We're trying to nurture each other. We're trying to make life livable. That's the direction we're trying to head. In the Democratic Party, they don't want any of it, because they're about using you as a tool. Donald Trump's only 1 month into his presidency, but I hope the world starts to see that this is a man. And I know the Middle East makes it difficult. That's the fly in the ointment. Everything's looking good, and you go, oh, damn, Gaza. And it's tough. But I think what we can say is that's a really difficult problem. It's difficult from a domestic political standpoint, given the control that the Jewish lobby has over America. And it's just a problem. Even the Arabs can't solve the Palestinian problem. And they don't want to solve the Palestinian problem, which is half the problem of the Palestinian problem. So that's trouble. But everywhere else, this is a guy that doesn't want to invade you, doesn't want to bomb you. He wants to sit down at a table and talk with you about how we can get along. And he's a businessman, which means, how can I make money? But if I'm treating you as an equal, that means I'm not robbing you. How can I make money without robbing you? How can we make money? What can we do? That's a healthy approach. And I also think that the big four are going to redefine the global relationships. Why? The United Nations was a product of war. And the United Nations is a construct of war. The Security Council is the lead element in the United Nations. If the United Nations was reflective of the genuine requirements of humanity, we would lead with the social, economic, and food aspect of it. they would be the number one players. The Security Council would be this minor little adjunct, but instead we lead with the Security Council, which talks about war, military force. We need to change that paradigm. We need to tell the military, you don't get to call the shots anymore. If we choose to have a military, it's going to be a military that is sized appropriately, because the way we interface with the world today is through diplomats and businessmen. We don't send the generals out to represent us anymore. We send out men in suits, women in suits. Anyways, that's I think what's happening here.
Thank you so much, Scott, for your time. Really appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Hi,